I was looking over a website this morning and started thinking through some of this stuff and immediately realized this was the kind of thing I should be making a video about. I want to challenge two pieces of advice that I think we hear all the time, that I think on some level we all think we understand intuitively, but we don't really stop and ask ourselves, like, what does that really mean? One of them is the advice that just says, understand your audience when you make content. And the other is write good content. We all innately think we understand what good content is, but I think when we stop and really ask ourselves, like, well, what is good content? What does that constitute? Like, level one of that understanding that I think a lot of businesses that do a pretty good job of their own marketing, they get, is to think, well, I'm understanding what my target customer fears, wants, is excited by, is afraid is going to happen if they don't something else. And let those things be a driver. Yes, that's true. And it can inform how do we open the copy on our homepage? What kinds of information, if we have a slider, are we going to put on that? To a point, sure. But I think too often that gets understood to mean from like a design standpoint, how do we open this page? And what bullet points are we going to punch people in the face with? What kinds of flowery jargon can we put there? And really, what we need to be thinking about is when we say understand the audience, when we answer parts of that question with what are they influenced by, what do they care about, that leads us to say, who are they really then looking for as an answer to that problem, and who does that champion have to be to really connect with them? A simple example would be a medical malpractice attorney versus a personal injury attorney. How do you determine when you're looking for either of those, what is a credible version of either of those? I would think if you're looking for a medical malpractice attorney, you want to see case studies. You want to see verbiage that speaks to a level of medical knowledge that I know you understand all the ins and outs of the medical industry. You have case studies to show where certain things went awry and the ways that you were able to help people get that rectified. With a personal injury attorney, I think when I was growing up, there was a guy that always was like, I'm Jim the Hammer Shapiro, and he talked in this really angry tone that essentially what he was conveying is, if somebody hurt your family, I'm going to get him and make him pay. Why was that effective? Well, because a person is emotional who has a family member who has been hurt by somebody, and maybe at least for some people, who you're looking for is a wrecking ball to get even, to get justice. That doesn't necessarily speak to that attorney's effectiveness in court or his credibility as an attorney, but it's the emotion that that person wants to tap into. That's important because zoomed out, bigger picture, those types of distinctions can be the difference between deciding the main kind of content we want to create is video material on these networks, or if we're going to be newsletter driven with people that we've already reached in some way, or are we trying to create thought leadership pieces on social and in blogs and hope that we could reach them that way. Part of those decisions are even informed by understanding what kind of a champion we need to show up as for this particular type of customer. And I think that's the piece that's not always as clear to folks when they're thinking of know my audience and make good content. They're just thinking, well, yeah, I need to do a run-of-the-mill homepage, and then the answer to this question just helps me fill in a couple of those bullet points on that same homepage. Something I'm seeing a lot in the last year or so, and it may or may not have anything to do with ChatGPT and content writing and people leaning on it, although when I have used it, I notice that it is guilty of this as well. Being vague. And not even intentionally vague. It's not like saying, I'm looking for a pair of shoes. What does that mean? You're not being very specific about what types of shoes. But even where it thinks it's being, or we think we're being more specific than that, saying, I would like a pair of tennis shoes that make me run faster. For what? Why do you need to run faster? Like, how much faster are we trying to run? Are there other factors that are going into this decision that also make it important? Simple example is when I was looking at a website this morning, part of their intro text in the front and center on their homepage of their site said, we help build brand awareness. And instantly my copywriter brain went into thinking, what is the value of brand awareness? Like, I know what you're trying to say, I think, and I know what you think you're saying, but I don't actually think that's creating the value in that statement that they thought it was. Because to me, I'm like, what good is awareness? For instance, I'm aware of McDonald's. I might be a person who's never going to eat there, and I might have a variety of reasons for that. Is the awareness of McDonald's valuable then? No. I know about it. I don't care about it. So then you think that through and you think, okay, so it's the caring about it that matters. It would still be kind of a lazy piece of copy to say, I help create magnetic brands, but that would at least be clearer that you're trying to illustrate. You're not just trying to put a brand on the map. You're saying, I innately understand the audience and the avatar that we need to show up as enough that the brand we're creating is something alluring, attractive to that audience. Awareness is sort of limp at that point. Those types of things, when I read copy, stand out to me. That when I'm trying to lend my creativity to it, I'm trying to think at that level of everything we say. Are we being clear? Are we being focused? Are we really giving a concrete enough of an example that the general point that we're trying to make is actually understood? Because I think a lot of the times we can fall into a trap where we think we're saying something and it's not really coming across that way. One other example, on that same website, they had mentioned, we are a content machine. I read that and thought, I know what you think you mean. You think you're conveying content is all we do, and all day, every day, we are just making it happen and churning it out, and that's why we're excellent at it. But when I read that, I think how it can also come across is a Xerox machine. I'm a content machine. I'm just all day copy, 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 turning it out. That actually doesn't speak to quality to me. And bear in mind that we are also now living in an age of literal content machines like ChatGPT. And a lot of people don't want that in their copy. And so broadcasting front and center, we're a machine when it comes to copy. I don't know that that would be the approach I would want to take personally to sell my value as a writer. And so lots of little traps like that where we can think we're saying something strong and accidentally be advocating against ourselves. And in this example, if it's a website where what you're selling is copywriting and creative kinds of marketing, you really have to nail that, because that's the whole thing you're selling, is essentially saying, I don't make these kinds of mistakes. And then if the opening part of my copy on my website makes that kind of misstep, it undermines everything else I'm telling you on this page, because I've already demonstrated I don't necessarily have the full command of that level of thought process. How much of the rest of what I'm showing you now is as relevant, is as trustworthy? That, when people talk about rapport building on a site, to me, I think that's the higher level of what they're really talking about. In rapport building is preventing the kinds of things that work against rapport. When I say thought leadership kind of content to folks when I'm talking about their SEO campaigns, I'm not just talking about what kinds of blog posts and pages on the site do we need to have to appear as a thought leader. I'm often looking at it like there's no real way to shortcut your way to thought leadership. You have to actually be a leader. You have to actually be that good. You have to actually show up. And the way that we show up is fine-tuned by that understanding the audience, but we also just have to show up. And too often we can lean on jargon to help with the show up part as a crutch. If we want it to be understood that, say, we're better at copywriting, or we're better at building homes, or we're better at plumbing than competitors, what it is that we're communicating, what we're even saying, the way that we explain what we're doing has to be novel, has to be really genuinely informative. And my last thought on this is, I think when it comes to writing copy on your website, brochures, whatever it is, I wouldn't say that this is 100%, but a lot of the time, if I had to make a generalization, I would say lean one extreme or the other. Either go no copywriting, where you're saying, I'm speaking very conversationally to somebody. Hi, I'm Brian, and I help people write material on their website that comes across better to readers. We help kind of anticipate what people are going to think about that and just take that into account so that we can be very clear. That's a very conversational way to explain that. And it's perfectly fine to write all of the copy in that style. If what you're going for is, I just want to seem like a guy you're having coffee with, we're old friends, I'm just chatting with you. For the right kind of client, for the right kind of reader, that's effective, and you can totally lean on that. But be consistent with that. If you're going to go with that style, then stick with it. And if you're not going to go that route and you want to put on the copywriter hat, I think you have to lean all the way into it. You have to channel your inner Don Draper, if you will, and say, we now have to be very thoughtful and very clever in, we're saying this because, and we've vetted this phrase 5 different ways, and this working is a setup for the next thing that we're going to say. And then these 2 things having happened and hit the mark well allows us to, in the 3rd step, do this. It's the flow of it is very intentional. And we're having each piece of that serve this larger trajectory that we've also plotted out. You have to be at that level. And I think the mistake that content like I was just giving you as an example from the website I was looking at, where it falls short is hugging the middle ground of saying, I'm not really casual and conversational enough to build on that just friendly old-timey rapport, but we're not being clever and thoughtful enough to impress either, because we're using a lot of empty or vague jargon on the site, and that's the reason that misses the mark. And I think a lot of sites that I look at fall into that camp of it's sort of hugging the line of those 2 extremes. And the simple advice I would have in a lot of those cases would be, you need to lean harder into one or the other, whichever you think is going to serve with your audience more. Pick a direction there and go in it. Some of the best copy I've ever read has been kind of no copywriting. The best copywriting is no copywriting, they could have said in that scenario. But if you're going to do copy, there's a heck of a lot that goes into each piece of it that we have to be very intentional about. So anyway, I'm going to shut up now. Hope that's been kind of informative to you. Put your questions down below if you'd like me to kind of elaborate further on some of that thought, and I might riff on that further in another video, but that's what I had today that I was thinking about looking at that one site. So catch you guys in the next one.